Hello, thank you for stopping by. My name is Becky and this is Bex Reads, and today I'm here to share with you my weekly reads, all the books that I have read from March 11th to 17th. The first one that I finished reading was an ARC, and it is Dragon Fruit. This comes out on April 9th. This is a YA Pacific Island inspired fantasy. And in this world, sea dragon eggs, dragon fruit, they have the ability to take away somebody's greatest sorrow with a wish, but every wish demands a price. And in the beginning of our story, we meet Hanalei, whose father stole a dragon fruit egg from the queen of his island because she was very sick and she needed it, but he stole it to save his daughter's life, Hanalei. And now it's 10 years later. Hanalei is 18 and she has nobody left. Her father took her when she was a little girl off the island, so she grew up on this other island. She lost her father because he died, and she really had to do very dangerous jobs to keep herself alive. She ends up actually getting captured by dragoneers and forced onto this ship. And she ends up actually returning to the island that her father took her from. And there she ends up reuniting with the people who she considered her family when she was younger, and her best friend, who happens to be Sam, who is the prince of this island. And Sam has been trying to collect sea dragons for years in the hopes that he can get them to mate to produce sea dragon eggs to help his mother, who is the princess, who is sick, that Hanalei's father stole from. I thought it was a very unique YA fantasy. I don't think I've ever really read a Pacific Island inspired fantasy that includes dragons. I really liked the sea dragon lore and the lore of the dragon fruit. I thought it was a very vividly described story. It really brought those Hawaiian Island vibes to it, which I really liked. I liked the family dynamics within this story because when Hanalei returns to this island, these people are essentially the only family she has left, and she's been gone for so long, and so they have questions for her, but they still treat her like she's a part of them because it wasn't her fault. She was just a kid. And there's also some family dynamics with Sam and one of his cousins and the relationship he has with his grandmother and things like that. It's a very family valued story. I also really loved that this story has animal familiars that are tattoos. So the main characters get tattoos at a certain age, at a certain point, and these tattoos can move around their body, but they can also manifest as real animals that can help them. And I absolutely love that idea. There is a bat familiar in this that is just so sweet, and I loved it. There's a spider familiar, there's a shark familiar, and Hanalei herself actually ends up getting a familiar as well. And I do think that this would work well as a standalone. I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a series. But if you just read this one book, I think you could call it good and enjoy it as just the story that it is. However, there is also potential for it to be part of a series. Now, a couple things that I didn't love about this were, in the beginning, the writing seemed very choppy to me. This author, I felt like, used commas too much. She would use commas to break up a sentence and insert information, description that wasn't needed. It was often repetitive to things we had already heard or learned about in this story, or descriptions that weren't really needed. Like at one point it was like, the dragon opened its mouth, comma, sharp teeth, something, comma, and then went on with the stories. And I was like, we didn't need to know that the dragon had sharp teeth because you have already described the dragon to us previously and we got a good description of it. So putting that in there, it just took me out of the story, and it felt very repetitive, and it felt like it was there for added word count. But I did realize that it got better the further along I went in the story, and it became less of a noticeable thing. The other thing that mildly irritated me about this was I have seen this book marketed as a romantic fantasy and a fantasy romance. I've seen the graphics people make where they point arrows to the book and have the tropes and stuff. And on many of them I have seen that. And so I was expecting for there to be a not heavy romantic aspect to this book, but at least a prominent romantic aspect. And while there is like attraction and feelings between Hanalei and Sam, I would not classify this as a romance because they don't interact in a romantic way in any sense of the word. I think they maybe kiss once, maybe, if I remember. And see, that's when I know it's not a romance, is if I can't even remember if they kissed in this book, it's not a romance. But even if there wasn't any sort of physical aspect to equate this to a romance, they don't talk to each other in any sort of romantic sense. It just very much felt like two platonic friends. That's what it felt like. If I didn't know that they were attracted to each other, I wouldn't have gotten the sense that they were even attracted to each other. But I definitely recommend it because it is unique. This cover is incredibly beautiful, and I think it's a story that a lot of people would enjoy reading, especially for the dragon aspect. And let me say, some of the things that these dragons do are quite vicious, and I kind of liked it. The next book that I finally finished reading was The Pomegranate Gate. Just look how pretty and holographic this is. It's such a beautiful cover. So this is an adult Jewish fantasy that is inspired by the Spanish Inquisition timeline. It is set in a world that is inspired by Spain itself. Even the map on the inside here, you can tell that it is inspired by Spain. So in this world, Jews are being told to either convert or get out of this country. Our two main characters are Toba, who is a young woman. She can speak, but she can't shout. She can walk, but she can't run. She can sleep, but she can't dream. And people often use these to her disadvantage. They will often bully her and things like that because they know she can't run and she can't yell for help. And our other character is Naphtali, and when he dreams of this world and these strange looking people that he's never seen. And while that's not strange in itself, the strange thing is that he shares these dreams with his father. And his father is always telling him, don't talk to anybody in your dream and don't mention your dreams once you wake up. And these two cross paths when they are fleeing this country, and they are part of this traveling caravan, and they get separated. Some people end up dragging Toba into the forest, and Naphtali goes after her. And Naphtali actually sees her disappear into this light within this pomegranate grove with these two men, and she's never seen again. So that sets him out on this mission to try and figure out what happened to her and how to bring her back. And he does this with the help of Toba's grandmother and this other old woman who sort of helps him along the way. And meanwhile, Toba, once she goes through this light, she ends up in this mirror realm where everything that happens in the human world is mirrored in this world. And she ends up at this abandoned castle almost with these two men, her uncle and nephew. And they are trying to keep her a secret. They're trying to give her tasks to do to figure out who she is. And they also realize that she actually has magic. And so she's trying to learn how to use her magic and what this world is and how it's related to the human world. For the first 60% of this book, I was intrigued. I was hooked. I was reading it at a fast clip. This is over 500 pages. And I was really invested in this world because I thought it was really unique. I loved the Jewish folklore. I loved sort of the Fae realm that Toba goes through. Toba's perspective was what kept me intrigued because I loved seeing her discover who she is and these powers that she never knew she had, and discovering more about this mirror realm and what's going on in it. Her magic that evolves and how she has to learn how to use it, and when she uses it wrong, she sort of has to ingest things that she produces from her magic to then resupply her magic. I thought it was very interesting. I really liked the time period this was set in. I do like historical fantasies, and the Spanish Inquisition is a time period where I've read a few books set in that time period, but not many. So I always like it when I can revisit that time period and learn a little bit more about what was happening. I also really liked the two old ladies that Naphtali is journeying with through the human realm. These two old women were hilarious. They bickered with one another and they had such great banter, and one of them's trying to help Naphtali. Meanwhile, the other one is she's not trying to stop him so much as she's trying to slow him down. And so they're relationship and their dynamic was just hilarious to read. But then we got to the 60% mark, and I don't know what happened at the 60% mark. I started getting bored. I started losing interest. There was a point in here where something happens with Toba, and another character is introduced, and it just, I don't know, something about it just didn't draw my attention. It took me longer than it should have to finish this book, mainly for the last 40% of it, because I wasn't picking it up. I wasn't feeling motivated to read as much as I was the first 60%. And I don't know why that was. I feel like for the last 40%, we get a little bit more of Naphtali's perspective. His just wasn't as compelling as Toba's point of view. There's also like some romantic elements in here that I just could have cared less about. I didn't really think they were of much value to the story. I didn't feel any sort of chemistry between the characters or anything like that. And I got kind of irritated with the uncle and nephew who are like watching over Toba. I felt like they were just stringing her along when they could have just explained things to her. They didn't. I don't know if that was used to just drag out the plot or what, but even if that was condensed to not make this book so long, I feel like it would have been better for that. I feel like because this is such a long book, even if they had just explained what was going on, reducing this by, I don't know, 200 pages, it still would have been a great book. So it is one that I recommend because it is so unique and it has a unique premise and unique magic and unique characters, but I don't think it's one that I will continue the series with because I was so bored the last 40%, and it took me like a good week to get through the 40%. I had gotten through the first 60% in like a couple days. And I was mostly connected to Toba. So if it sounds interesting to you, I definitely recommend you check it out, but it's just, I'm sad that I didn't love it as much as I did in the beginning because it's such a beautiful book. It's such a unique story, but man, that last 40% was just, it was difficult. I then read the second book in the Temperance series, which was Acolyte. I read the first book earlier this year. It was just a random book that I found searching for friends to lovers fantasy romance, and this came up. This is about a fae world. There's some shadow magic. There's also time magic. There's a bunch of different magic in this story, and we're following two characters, Tally and Sky, who are best friends, and something has happened to estrange them, and they're coming back together. There's this war going on. So in this book, Tally and Sky actually get separated. Sky is in the middle of this war that is raging after some big event took place in the first book, and Tally is stuck in this time loop that she is forced into so that it can force her to awaken her magic. She did not realize she was magic because she's human and humans don't have magic. So she is stuck in this Groundhog Day experience where she has to live the same thing over and over again, where she is stuck in this house and everything outside this house just goes on repeat. But in this house, this certain person is forcing her to learn tasks and push her to really bring forth her magic, because her magic is what is going to ultimately either save their world or end their world. Meanwhile, she's trying to find ways to communicate with Sky and let him know what's going on, but Sky just thinks he's going crazy and he thinks that he's seeing her ghost and just dreaming about her because everybody else thinks she's dead. I did enjoy this one. I liked it a tad less than the first book just because Sky and Tally are separated for the majority of this book and it was torture. Ugh. I wish they would have been together more. I did like Tally's magic and her learning how to control it and really embrace it. I of course love that this is friends to lovers, although I will say no smut in this book at all. So is it really friends to lovers? It's friends to romance. They end up falling in love with one another and you can tell that they have chemistry. So, you know, that being my favorite trope, of course I'm going to love this. I also really loved that Tally gets a pet familiar in this story in the form of this creature called a mimic that can sort of just be whatever it wants to be. And this mimic is actually seen as a dangerous creature because it feeds off of Tally's like blood and her magic. So it needs that to survive, and everybody thinks that it's going to turn on her and kill her, when in fact it pretty much just bonds with her and it's there to protect her. It's super cute. I loved it. I don't know if this is the end of this duology or if there's more. I kind of get the impression that there's going to be more because it says it's a series, not a duology. But no word whatsoever. But I am glad that I found this series because I really liked it. It's a different kind of fantasy romance, and it does lean more toward the fantasy than the romance because, as I mentioned, no spice at all. In the first book, I want to say maybe like half a pepper. So do with that what you will, but one I do recommend. And the last book I finished reading this week was The Frost Lord by Atley Wykes. This is actually a free novella that you can get if you sign up for the author's newsletter. Now, I didn't sign up for her newsletter. She actually just sent it to me because I shared that I was loving her series. She asked me, would you like this free prequel novella? And I was like, yes, absolutely. I had read book 1 and 2 in her Inkwater series already. I absolutely loved them. So I knew the backstory of Alaric and Vivian, the two main characters of this story, beforehand. I'm going to tell you right now, theirs is a very sad story. It doesn't exactly end happily. Let me just tell you that. But in this, we follow Alaric, who is the Frost King, and he's having difficulties being king. He had to take over the role suddenly, and he doesn't feel like he's a very good king. So he goes out into the wilderness just to sort of find peace with himself, get himself together. And there he ends up saving this wolf from this bear attack. So he takes this wolf who is very, very injured, and they end up in a cave together. So one cave. And he's nursing this wolf back to health until he realizes that this wolf isn't just a wolf, it's a wolf shifter, and it is Vivian. And she actually was escaping her abusive husband, who is the Wolf King. He was a very abusive man to her, and she had just delivered a stillborn baby and was pretty much just ripped open because her husband didn't allow her to heal or anything like that. And she had plans to take her newborn baby and flee anyway. And then when this baby was stillborn, she's like, I gotta leave. I can't let him force me into breeding again. So she's dealing with a lot of abuse and trauma and things like that. And Alaric is trying to be very protective of her and give her time to trust him again and things like that. And they end up falling in love and realizing that they're mates. I liked the chemistry between Alaric and Vivian. I thought it was very sweet. I loved that Vivian learned to trust again, and Alaric was a very sweet character. He really allowed her to set the pace in their relationship and didn't try to force her into anything. I do wish this had been a full-length book. I would have liked to seen Alaric and Vivian's relationship dragged out a little bit more. It did feel very insta-love because it is a novella. It's under 200 pages. And like I mentioned, that ending is very, very bittersweet when you've already read the first 2 books and you understand the dynamics of what happens, and then to read their story is very heartbreaking. But I love this series. So if you're looking for a fantasy romance series, check this one out. It's one I really enjoy. Those were the 4 books that I read this week. Let me know down in the comments, have you read any of these? Are you interested in reading any of these? Or if you don't want to comment that but would like to let me know that you made it to the end of this video, could you leave me an ice cube emoji? And with that, thank you so much for watching, and until my next video, happy reading. Bye.